Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so happy to welcome you to this webinar, Common Europe webinar sponsored by LANSA. Our today's speaker is Eugene King. Eugene will be speaking on a deep dive into application modernization on the IBM I. Eugene is a LANSA solution engineer and has over 20 years experience helping customers modernize their existing applications. He is responsible for demonstrating LANSA's capabilities through custom demos, implementations of a proof of concept, and delivery of pilot programs. He also works on development projects and stays current on the latest trends and technologies in the industry. So Eugene, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Ranga. So once again, welcome to this webinar entitled a Deep Dive into Application Modernization on the IBM I. Now, please note that there will be time for questions at the end of the session. So the objective of today's session is to take you through the steps necessary to take an IBM I application and reuse it in a modern back-office style web application, which works seamlessly alongside new functionality. Now, to do this, we first need to understand the role that's played by each of the three key parts to LANSA's modernization toolset. The first is Axes. Now, this is LANSA's refacing tool and can also be used as a standalone solution, and I'll be demonstrating that in a few moments. The second is Visual LANSA frameworks. Now, this is what it says on the box. It is a framework onto which developers can build their application. And finally, there is RAMP. This allows you to plug in your Axes reface screen into Visual LANSA frameworks. Now, let's take a look at each of these in turn before moving on to the demonstration. Starting with Axes. Now, with Axes, we can take an IBM I application and very quickly web enable it. Now, this is done on the fly and requires very little effort on your part. This is an example of what a screen looks like out of the box when Axes is initially installed. Now, using Axes web-based development tool, you can take the screen even further and add new functionality, such as charts, maps, and you can even merge multiple screens into a single screen. So let's go on to the first demonstration. So in this next part, I'm going to demonstrate the various stages of screen modernization using Axes. I'm going to start with looking at the application running green on black using IBM Client Access. I'll then show you the various stages of Axes development before moving on and showing you how we can go in and customize the screens. Let's jump over to the application. So here we are. This is running IBM I Client Access. I'm just going to show you what it looks like running green on black first, just so you get an idea of what I'm actually going to be modernizing. So this is your standard menu system. I'm just going to navigate through the menu system to the LANSA tool company. Now, the LANSA tool company is a demonstration system based on a fictitious company that sells tools online. We're going to be looking specifically at the back office functionality, and specifically they work with customers. So here we have our work with customers. I can type in a position to, go down to the option here, do a select to show the details, an F4 prompt to show the discounts, F12 to go back, and I've got a little shortcut here which we'll be using later on when we start demoing the ramp tools, where all I need to do is, if I know what the options are, I just put in option 2 to see the address, and we can see the address information there. So these are the basic screens we're going to be looking at modernizing with the Axes toolset. So now I'm going to jump over to a browser. And what I'm going to do first of all is show you what those screens look like out of the box. So when I initially install Axes on your system, you then have instant access to your 5250 applications over a browser. So I'm just going to log in, and we get our display program message, enter through there, and here's my menu systems now. So this is the same that you saw on green on black, but now what we're doing is Axes works on the 5250 data stream, so whatever's displayed is converted into HTML. So the buttons on the bottom, so these were the function keys, and the menu system here is now hyperlinked, so I can now drive the application with my mouse. And we can just keep going through using my mouse to work the application until we get to that subfile. And this is the same subfile we saw previously. You know, I can go in, type in LANSA, do a position 2. Now, if I do a right click on the subfile option, you'll notice that we get a pop-up box now. And again, this is out of the box. I can look at the details. Where we have automatic prompts, if I press F4, this is what our prompt boxes actually look like. And again, I can still use the function keys to navigate around the system. And again, it behaves exactly the same as it did previously. And there's our address information. Okay, the next stage. So when we look at customization, there are two ways we can approach the customization. We can make a local change on a screen, or we can do a global change. So what we do there is that we can set up some global rules that determine how elements on your screen are actually displayed. So let me illustrate what we've got there. So I'm going to navigate again through the system, work with customers. And again, I'm going to look at the details. So now here's a prime example. So this where we've got the discount code is a global rule. So I have a rule put in place where if I see the label discount code, I'll automatically get a drop down. So I'm replacing the prompt box now with a drop down. Likewise, where I see the web URL, I've now made that into a clickable URL to open up a web page. If I go F12, and let's go and have a look at the address information. And you'll see here additional examples. So we've got the bill ship is now a checkbox. And the bill state and ship state are now drop downs. And I'll show you how we get that when we go on to the actual development tool. But you can use that for dates as well, for creating date prompters and date selectors on screens globally. So I don't have to go into each individual screen. I can do it on a global basis. So the next stage is to identify the screens that you would like additional functionality on. So here now you can see an example of a customized login screen with my own background and logo as part of it. I've customized the program messages so it appears as a pop-up. And now those initial menus that you saw previously have been formatted into a contact card style menu system. So I can then go into demonstrations. There's my LANSA Tool Company menu. I can work with customers. So now I've got a more web-looking application. I've even customized the subfile to appear like contact cards and have the information displayed slightly differently. The little prompt box here allows me then to go in to each of the different options, the subfile options. So here I can see the details. Still behind that screen is your subfile, but I'm choosing to render it in a completely different way. And again, this is now my detail screen. So this is where we've got the drop down and the hyperlink for the website. But I've also added some additional functionality. So I'm adding value to the application. The first being the order history. So this is the order history for this specific customer. So you can see we've got 61 pages of this. And I even have the ability to either copy it to a clipboard, download it to Excel, CSV, print, or even create a PDF. Okay, so if I just click that option, it'll then create my PDF. Let me just drag that over so you can actually see that. And there's a very simple PDF. Now that is going directly to the database. So this is functionality which sits outside your application, goes directly to the database and retrieves that information. Now, again, when we go on to the development, I'll show you how that's done. We also have integration to charting capabilities here. So there we see the top 10 specific customers. F12 from there and go back to the main menu. And then we go into the address information. So in this case, what we've added is we've added a link to Google Maps. So we're now pulling information directly from the screen and then driving the Google Maps here. But the customization on this page isn't finished yet. You'll notice here that the bill state and the ship state, I want to have drop downs. The bill ship same address, I want to actually be a checkbox rather than yes, no. So now I'm going to show you the development tool. So for that, I'm going into the Axes homepage, going into my developers tools. Okay, and the first thing I see are my projects. So here's a number of different projects that I've actually been working on. I'm just going to go to page 2, and this is the project that I was demonstrating previously. So I'm just going to open that up. I'm going to work as a TS2 developer. So this will then open up my developer's workbench for this. Now this is all web-based, so I don't need to install anything on my desktop. I can just run this in my browser. So I'm going to sign in. And I'm just going to quickly go through the menu systems until I get to the LANSA Tool Company address screen. Work with customers. And we'll just take the first one and go to the address screen. So this is the one we want to do some customization. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to show you how we do local customization. To do that, I go into edit screen mode. And when I go into edit screen mode, you'll notice on the right-hand side that additional options are become visible. And these are the elements I can use to create the interface for my screen. And the way that I would do that, so for example, I want this as a checkbox. I go to the checkbox control and I just drag and drop that onto my bill ship. I don't want this here. I actually want to move it to the top. So let me just drag that to the top there. And then I'm going to have the same with my bill and ship same label. Okay. So let me just do a little bit of formatting. So I'm going to move that down a little bit. And then I'm going to select the checkbox. I'm going to align in the middle, just like that. Okay. And maybe this needs to come across, oops, a little bit there, like that. Okay, that'll do. Okay, so that's as much as I'm going to do on the local editing. So I'm going to save that and then exit screen edit. And that then shows me the actual changes. Okay, now the next thing I want to do is to this time apply a global rule. So rather than visiting every screen, I want to just change specific elements on all screens within inside my application. And to do that, I go to my auto GUI rules. Now these auto GUI rules are used to decide how function keys are displayed, how subfiles are treated, and how subfile options are treated. And to set up a rule on how we display different elements is we go to the set elements rule. And you can see here that I've already got a number of predefined elements, but the one I'm really looking at is the state dropdown. Currently, I've got that turned off. So the first thing we need to do is to identify what that element is. And the way that we do that is we say, on the left-hand side, if the element contains state and is output, and the target is input, so that's the input, then this is where this visualization is going to take place. Okay? So we just say okay to that. We then say, right, so this is going to be a drop down. Let me just show you that first. This is going to be a drop down control. So here you can see the different types. It's a drop down control. So we need to recover the values for the drop down from a table. And in this case, it's a static table. And the table is called US state. Now we define tables at the application level. And you can see here that in the main project folder, I've got edit static tables, edit dynamic tables. Static tables are loaded at the beginning of a session and only at the beginning, where dynamic tables are loaded on demand. So let's have a look at the static table definitions. Let me just click that. We pull that up. So if we look down here, we can see that this is the the table definition for the discount codes dropdown. And all we do is we stipulate a SQL. So this is an SQL statement that says I'm going to recover the code and the description from this library and this file in this library. Okay, and we're going to name those values and text. Likewise, if we keep going down, we can see this is what's used to build the chart for the top 10 customers. But we don't have to use SQL for this. We can use any number of different formats, whether it's XML or even hard code them, as you see here. So the one that I'm looking for, if I just scroll down, is the US state. So this is the hard-coded US states. And this is the one that I'm actually using in this table here. So I've stipulated a static table, US state, and I say OK. I'm then going to enable it, say OK, and then I'm going to save it. So remember, this is going to be applied globally. So rather than doing it on an individual element basis, it now applies it. So wherever it sees state, it now gives me a drop down. Okay, so that's how we go about our customization of our screens, both locally and on a global basis. So with other refacing tools, this would normally be as far as you could take your application. You can web enable your screen and make it look modern, add functionality around the peripheral, but you can't change the core behavior of the application or add core functionality. With Axes, refacing your screens can be just the first step in your modernization journey. Now let's take a look at the other parts of LANSA's modernization toolset. The Visual LANSA frameworks is a key part of LANSA's low-code and IBM modernization development approach. And it is used to design, implement, and deploy web, Windows desktop, or mobile applications. It allows developers to hit the ground running when developing back-office style systems. And we'll see this in action later in the demonstration. Now, the term Visual LANSA is quite a mouthful, so from now on, I'm going to actually refer to it as the VLF. The final piece is RAMP. Now, RAMP stands for Rapid Application Modernization Process. It is a combination of a process and re-engineering tools that lets you rapidly consolidate your IBM applications into the VLF, allowing you to run existing systems alongside new development. You can then incrementally replace your RPG or COBOL programs with new components without serious impact to your business operations. Let's quickly see how this works by first looking at a typical IBM application. And this is one that we saw during the Axes demo. Firstly, we had to log on. Then we navigated through a menu system to the desired option. Then performed some sort of search and finally selected a record from a subfile to display the details. Now this is our target screen, the screen where you will maintain your application data. Now the other screens are used to navigate around the system only. In ramp terms, we call these screens junctions. The screen where you will maintain your application data is called a destination. Now, this is the screen that we are interested in and which will be plugged in to the VLF. The ramp tool will handle the navigation to the destination behind the scenes. So as an end user, you will no longer see the junctions, only the destinations. And it is this screen which is plugged in to the VLF. The screen itself is unchanged, but now, with thanks to Axes and Ramp, it sits in a modern application running in a browser. So, in the next part of the webinar, I will demonstrate a completed application which utilizes LANSA's modernization tools, and then I'll take you through the process of how we can build a similar application, showing you how we prototype a new application, how we can evolve that prototype by adding functionality generated with the various wizards provided by LANSA. And finally, I'll show you how we can use the ramp tools to add the Axes reface screens to that application. So let's start by showing you the completed application. So again, this is LANSA Tool Company. So now I'm executing my framework in the browser. And we're presented with our login. So I need to enter my login credentials and sign in. Okay, so this is developed using Visual LANSA's frameworks. And here you see our first component. This is brand new functionality developed using the LANSA toolset. And it's an example of a dashboard showing various key performance indicators for your organization. So if I then go to the menu here, I can go to the IBM sessions. And what I'm going to do is quickly start up 2 sessions. So this is an example of something I had to do for one of our customers who wanted the ability to, just sign in one time and then access standard 5250 systems. So there's no modernization, there's just the Axes reface screens. Okay, but you don't have to sign on. And just as an aside, Visual LANSA frameworks actually support single sign-on. So whether you're using LDAP or whether you're using Google, we support that as well. So we support that single sign-on. So here you can see an example of 2 screens, polar opposites, same screen. One of the requirements was that the screen looked like a 5250 screen. So we've just applied a styling to the one on the left that allows us to allow the application to look like a green on black screen. On the right, we see how far we can actually take that with modernization with the Axes screens. But what we're really interested in is this sales order processing, specifically the customers. So this is new functionality. So this has been created using LANSA, and I'll show you how we do that when we show you how this is developed. I'll put in a partial description of the customer ID, and it comes back with everything that matches. So if I now select an entry from that results list, it'll then open up the information about that specific customer. Now, what's happening in the background here is that Ramp is now navigating through the various menu options. So it's signed onto the system, navigating through the menu system to then show the 5250 application. Okay, and this is what you're actually seeing here. So now I navigate around, and the way I navigate around it, I just select from the instance list here. So I don't have to go to my subfile, reselect, and then show the information from the subfile. I can just select the various tab at the top of the page to see the actual details. So there's my tab information. So that's the 5250 screens, and alongside it, I've generated some new functionality. So this is the ability to take notes. So if I go back onto LANSA, we'll be able to see a couple of notes for that, replacement parts, yeah, and also add attachments. So I'm adding more value. So it's not just easier to navigate around now and easier to train end users on, but I've added additional functionality, so I'm adding values. And we can take that further. So this is the axes reface screen here that we've got, that you see here. And what I can do is I can front that screen, and we call this a wrapper. So I've created a LANSA program which captures the information from that 5250 screen and displays it in a completely different way. And I can take that from multiple screens and also combine it with other controls like this order history here, which is being pulled directly from the database. Now, as a developer, you'll notice I've got this little eye icon here. That allows me to show you the underlying 5250 screen. Okay, I can go back and I can show you what the actual wrapper is like. And with that, I could decide, well, rather than take the information directly from the screen now, I'm going to actually do a call directly to the database. And I can then park the RPG program that drives that. Yep, so it becomes a complete LANSA program. And as such, it becomes platform and database agnostic. You can run this on Windows, you can run it on the IBM I. Okay. So that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to build. So let's take a look. Let's go and see how we do that. So this is the LANSA IDE, the Integrated Development Environment. And this is where a LANSA developer spends all their time. This is where we create our programs. This is where we define our database and our tables for that database. But for this demo, we're going to be focusing more on the Visual LANSA framework, the VLF. For that, I'm going to open up the work as a developer. So this opens up a workbench for me. I'm going to open up an empty framework. So this has got nothing in it. This has got some basic security and basic outlines in it. But I'm going to use the prototyping tool now to actually create the application outline. So go into Tools, and we go onto the Instant Prototyping Assistant. So now we're asked a series of questions on what objects our business is divided into. So how do we see our business? Well, if we're looking at the LANSA tool company, an example of that would be a customer, a product, an order. It could be employee. So they're the three objects that we're currently working with. And then we go next. Now, what actions do we want to associate with those objects? In other words, what details do we actually want to see? Well, if you remember what the subfile options were, there were details, there was address information, web information, and order history for the customers. And then what I can do is I'll drag the details across to each one of those. I'll have a details tab in each. And then the address, order history, and web, I'm just going to drag across and add to the customers there. And then go next. Okay, now it's asking how I want this organized. So we have an administration section already. So I'm going to call this one Sales Order Processing. Okay, I'm going to assign those three objects to Sales Order Processing. I'm going to quickly change that color. I'm going to make it a little bit darker. Okay, and we can leave it like that. So now I'm going to go next. I get a summary of what I'm going to be creating. So this is the application area, and these are the three objects associated with it. I'm going to go finish. And it'll now generate my prototype for me. Just closed it down, and now I'm going to open it back up again for me. And I can take that prototype and I can execute that prototype now. Yeah, I can provide that URL to an end user and they can run that prototype. But before doing that, what I want to do is add some additional notes to it. So as part of this process, if we look at the applications, there's our business objects and there's our customer. I'm going to select customer here. So as part of this process, what we can do is we can actually take notes on what the end users want. So I myself have actually used this tools, sat with users and developers, and created a prototype of what the application is actually going to look like. Now, we're not going to do any programming at this point. What we're going to be doing is essentially painting a picture. I'm just going to get all the contents here. And what we get here is a working specification document that will eventually evolve into the final application. I can add images. So let's say as part of the brainstorming session that we created some images, some pictures and drawings of what we want the application to actually look like. So here's something we created on the whiteboard. And I can just resize that. So it just essentially is just a little bit of note saying, I want to do a search by customer ID and customer name. I want a contact card style interface, and I want this information on that. Okay. We can do the same for details. Let's clear the content. And I can add a screen of what the screen is going to look like. So for example, I can say, well, actually, we want the new screen to look like this. And I'll leave it like that. Okay. So that's the prototype phase done. I'm just going to do a quick save. And then I'm going to execute it. Once again, enter my credentials. So now I provide that URL that you see at the top to an end user. They can have a look and see what the application is going to actually look like. So I'm going to turn automatic tiling on. And we're going to see the basic outline of the application with my notes. We're going to search for the information. So this emulates a search. And now we can see the various information related to it. So these are the tabs that I created previously: details, address, order history, and order information. So that's the basic framework. So once we've validated that, then we can go in and we can evolve it further. So we can add functionality to it. So now, first thing I'm going to do is actually add a nice icon. And I'm just going to pull up, let's have a smiley face. Then I'm going to go on to my common activities. So these are the activities associated with each of those business objects, the stages that you would go through to create the necessary functionality. And you start with, well, what do you want to display in your list? Well, actually, I want to use the LANSA tool customer master file, which is LTC cust, and I can search for that in my repository, and select the file from there. And then I can select the information to appear in the list. So I'm going to have the customer name. In fact, I'm going to use the label. And then I'm going to have the email address. We'll also have the phone number. And let's have a look what else we've got. We'll have the credit limit. And we'll also have the current balance. So I just drag and drop those across there. Now, if I click in the column headings, I then have options available. Now, one of the things built into the VLF is responsive design. So I could run this on a tablet. And if it's run on a tablet, I can decide, well, I don't want to see every field within the list. I don't want to see all those columns. I only want to see specific ones. For example, I won't have the credit limit, so I'm going to turn that off for a small screen. And I won't have that. I won't have the current balance, okay, on a small screen. Likewise, let's not have the email address. And I can just close that down. One final thing to do is tell it how I uniquely identify a customer. And I'll be using this later on when I get onto the ramp tools. This is the LANSA tool company customer ID. So this is the alpha key 1. Once I've put that into this section here, I then say finish. Now, part of the brainstorming session, we decided to use the contact card style. So I'm going to just automatically generate that component. Now I have an option to create only or create and open in the editor. I'm just going to create it for the purpose of this demo. So that will now create the appropriate code to show the results list in a contact card style interface. So once I've done that, now I need to determine how I'm going to be doing that search. So we've got a number of options, but for this demo, I'm going to use the SQL search over a table. I'm going to use the customer ID and the customer name. Now for the customer ID, if I do a right click, I'm going to have begins with. And for the customer name, I'm going to have contains. Now I'm finished with that. That's all I'm going to have my search. So again, I have the create only or create and over in the editor. So normally as a developer, if I wanted to add enhancements to that or change the layout, I would create and open in the editor, and then I would amend the code appropriately. But we don't need to do that for this. Now what's happening here is it's generating the client logic, and it's also generating the server-side logic to access the database and plugs both of those together. So that's that part done. Now for the next part, I'm just going to add the attachments. So you'll notice down here that we have some common functionality that you might use as part of showing information for a business object. One of those is notes. Again, I'm just going to create that one. Or whether you want to use map or want to use graphs or charts. And I can even create a CRUD, which is a create, read, update, and delete functionality. But I'm going to be using the 5250 screens for that. So I'm going to execute it again. So now we've generated the LANSA functionality. Let's have a look and see what that actually looks like. I'm going to sign on. Navigate to my customer. Turn automatic tiling on. And now if I type in a partial name for customer ID, it then brings up the instance list. I can even do a quick search in there, just like that, and it will then search inside the results of that list. If I then go on to LANSA, we'll see the tabs. So here's my notes functionality that I added, and you'll see that this is my replacement part note, and also attachments there. So I can just add drag and drop attachments and drop that in. So now that's generated a new LANSA functionality, but now I want to plug in the 5250 screen into this here rather than it just being a prototype. So we go back to our developers console here, and I'm going to open up the ramp tools. It's asking me to sign on. So just wait for that to log on to the IBM. And I'm going to start an identification session. Okay, I just say okay to that. So now, on the left-hand side here, we see all of the different junctions and destinations, and we've got this thing called a special. Now, a special is a screen which may or may not occur as part of the navigation around your application. So we have special handling for that. For example, a program message. So the program message screen may or may not happen. So we have to be able to conditionally handle that where necessary. So now what it's done here is opened up an Axes developers session, but we're not interested in doing the development at this point. I'm going to turn on auto update navigation scripts, and I'm going to log in. So now it's recording the keystrokes that I'm doing to navigate around the system. So first of all, I'm going to log on. There's my program message. But here we go for the first screen, which is the EK menu. That's red, which means that it's not been identified. That, as I mentioned, is a junction. So we identify that as a junction. And we go into demonstrations, and that is another junction. LANSA Tool Company. Once again, a junction. work with customers. That again is a junction. Now, to get to the next screen, I'm just going to type in the option here and put the option 1, as I showed you when we were doing the axes previously. It's just a little bit of a shortcut. I then just do enter, and that'll display the details for LANSA. Now this is a destination. I'm going to classify that as a destination. Then, to complete the cycle, I press enter, F12, 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 right back to the initial menu, and then I sign off. And that's completed the entire cycle. There's one thing I need to do before plugging in the details screen into the details tab, and that is just to tweak the code a little bit. So as part of the navigation, so if I select the script here, so what we've generated here is standard JavaScript. And if we look down this JavaScript, we can see, so this is where we decide where we're going to be going to. So if we're going to the LANSA maintenance, or if we're going to the customer details. So this is the maintenance screen, press function F12, so on and so forth. So this is recorded, that navigation. So when we go to the customer's details screen, you'll notice that we've got a hard-coded LANSA. What this would mean would be that every time I executed that piece of functionality, I'd always go to LANSA. So I need to plug in the identifier from the list that we previously created. So if I do a right click, we get a number of different options, but the one I'm interested in here is the current instant list entry that has been selected, and we select alpha key 1. That's it. I save it. We then go into the customer details tab here. So we've now saved that. And I go here, and you'll notice here that we've got the customer and we've got the details. So I'm going to plug that tab in there. Now, because the Visual VLF is now handling all the navigation around the system, for this demo, I'm actually just disabling all the function keys. So there's all the function keys now done. I'm going to do a full save. And now I'm going to execute. Type in my username and password and sign in. Navigate to my sales order processing customer. Turn on automatic tiling. Put in a partial description. And then I select. What will happen now is that the ramp tools will now load up, log in, navigate to the 5250 screen, and show the axes screen without having to show any of the menus, the junctions that you would normally see. So there's the screen. And again, I just navigate around it. And we've got the new functionality and the old functionality sitting alongside each other. And then I would repeat it for the order history, the address, and the web information. So during the demo, I've shown you how we can take your IBM I application and quickly web enable it with axes. And with a little work, we can change the look of the application and enhance the functionality. Now you could stop there, but with the aid of VLF, you can take those axes screens and embed them in a modern web application. In this way, you can leverage your existing 5250 applications. Now you can further enhance those screens using the wrappers, or even replace them completely with new functionality created with Visual LANSA. So that concludes the presentation and demonstration portion of this webinar. So at this point, I will open it up to questions. So let me just have a look and see if we have any. Okay, we have a couple. The first is, do you need the RPG or DDS source for axes? No, you don't. Or even for ramp screens. It works on the 5250 data stream. We don't do any changes to the RPG or to the DDS. It just strictly works on that actual data stream. So if you don't have the source code for either, then it doesn't really matter. You can still use axes and ramp to modernize your systems. The next question, I have over 1,500 screens in my application. How long would it take to customize these using axes? Well, the simple answer is as soon as you've installed axes, your users will be able to access your application using a browser, any browser of their choice, in fact. Now, you don't have to customize every individual screen in your application. Now, in the first instance, we would look at defining a set of global rules and styles which could be automatically applied to the entire system. Now, once this has been done, you can then look at identifying which screens need further customization. Now, as a general rule, users tend to spend 80% of their time in 20% of the screens. And these are the screens that you would look at potentially adding functionality, like the Google Maps extensions you saw during the demo. Now, these types of customizations can take anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour, depending on the extent of the customization required per screen. To get an idea on how long it would take to customize your 1,500 screens, we would first need to look at your screens and then determine the extent of the additional functionality required. Okay, so final question, what training is required? Well, there are two parts to this question. The first being that of the training requirements for axes. Now, there is no official training course for axes, but once you've installed it on your IBM I, you'll be able to run through the tutorials. Now, these can take between 1 to 2 days to complete, but once you've actually done that, you'll have all the skills necessary to customize your screens. Now, the second part is the training requirements for ramp. Now, this is a little bit more involved, and this can be between 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the requirements of your first project. And this course would include the Visual LANSA fundamentals. So you would learn about the LANSA repository, you would learn about the LANSA programming language. And as part of that, you would also learn about the VLF and the ramp and the ramp toolset. Okay, so that's all the time we have now for questions. I've made a note of all the additional questions, and if I didn't answer yours during the session, I'll respond to you directly. So thank you for attending today's webinar. I'll now hand you back to Ranga for a couple of closing remarks.
Thank you, Eugene. It was really interesting, and you could see that how easily, quickly, and efficiently you can modernize your applications. Before closing, I would like to remind you just two things. One, please do not forget the exit survey. And second, please remember that the Common Europe Congress will be in Denmark 13th to 16th of June, and look forward to Common Europe website for more information. Thank you so much, and stay safe, stay healthy, and wash your hands often. Thanks. Bye-bye.